name is Jackie Mack, and I'm a Senior Program Manager. The purpose of this video is to provide information and guidance on how to access RIA state grant funds for infrastructure assistance. We hope the information presented will help you apply for funding to improve infrastructure in your community. Let me briefly review the agenda. You will hear from several presenters today. RIA offers 3 grant programs, and we will discuss each one, including who's eligible to apply, the priorities for assistance, and the eligible activities. We're also pleased to provide some real-life project examples. Next, we will go over the application in detail, including the type of documentation we're looking for. Finally, we will review the selection process as well as provide some tips on developing a project. Now, if you have not already visited our website, please plan to do so. You will be able to access all of our program resources, including the grant application for this year, grant program strategy, and other infrastructure funding resources. RIA offers 3 grant programs. I will cover the basic and economic grant programs by discussing eligible and ineligible activities, match requirements, program priorities, and ending with several examples of projects awarded in each program. Our basic and economic infrastructure programs are for capital improvement projects.
With each category, we have developed specific purposes to help potential applicants see the difference in the categories we offer. For basic, the project should help utilities meet regulatory guidelines, minimize environmental concerns, improve the capacity for existing customers, and provide sustainability of infrastructure already in place. Under economic, the goal is to assist in economic development by addressing infrastructure capacity, which in turn leads to job expansion or creation and provide an overall boost to economic development that will impact local areas. Before I get into the specifics about the 2 categories, let me begin with some general information. It is always important to emphasize who can apply for RIA grant funds. Remember, RIA grants are offered statewide, and grant funding is available to local governments, special purpose and public service districts, and public works commissions. Not-for-profit water or sewer companies are not eligible applicants, but may be assisted with RIA funds if the local government being served by the project serves as the applicant. And not only must the local government apply, but must also participate in the implementation of that project. It is also important to note that private for-profit water and sewer companies are not eligible to receive grant assistance. Please reach out to us if you are unsure of your eligibility. RIA offers assistance for publicly owned water, wastewater, and stormwater drainage facilities. Our focus of funding throughout the state continues to be eligible activities directly related to constructing, upgrading, improving, and extending water, sewer, and drainage infrastructure. RIA funds may only be used for eligible project-related construction costs, except those specified as the applicant's responsibility. Applications should not be submitted for activities that are under contract or obligated at the time of application. As shown on this slide, you can see that RIA projects cover a wide range of construction activities, like new sources of water, such as wells or raw water intakes, or upgrading water and sewer lines, improving or building new treatment plants, storage tanks and pump stations, as well as drainage improvements to alleviate flooding, are eligible for RIA funds. No matter which activity you hope to undertake, it is critical that the appropriate supporting documentation be submitted, making a case for the project's need, as well as reflecting the significant impact these improvements would have on the system. Now, this slide provides guidance on what RIA generally does not pay for including some specific construction activities, as well as non-construction activities, which, unlike SCIP grants, have always been ineligible for state-funded projects. These activities include engineering, permitting, construction management, easement or acquisition costs, as well as legal or administrative fees. As you can see, there are even some construction activities that are considered ineligible, and you want to keep that in mind when developing a potential project. But remember also that these costs can count towards the match requirement. For example, we don't fund utility relocations related to road widening or paving projects unless there is an upgrade to the line size. Keep in mind that the South Carolina Department of Transportation, DOT, has a utility relocation program that can assist public water and sewer utilities in relocating their lines when it's tied to road infrastructure improvements if the utilities meet DOT's connection and population criteria. Remember also that we do not pay for any work done on private property, such as service lines. Instead, our funds can basically be spent on activities from the road to the meter. For projects within Tier 3 and 4 counties, RIA may consider funding standalone projects for certain permanently installed equipment, such as generators or meters, where there is a demonstrated need for greater resiliency and sustainability, but it will not receive the highest priority. Other ineligible items include impact fees. Those must be a local cost. The same is true for non-permanent equipment, such as on-site construction machinery like excavators or backhoes. And if it's related to operation and maintenance, like repairs, lab analysis, or equipment, again, those are also considered ineligible costs. And finally, new connections when you're extending water or sewer are the responsibility of the grantee.
The maximum allowable grant amount is $1.5 million for each category, basic and economic. Now, there may be special circumstances in which we would be willing to consider a larger request, but we would expect that such requests would not be the routine. All applicants are expected to cost share in construction project activities. This can be accomplished in a number of ways. As I just detailed in the previous slide, all applicants are required to pay for any non-construction costs. Remember, these are costs like administration, engineering, and acquisition. Paying for these non-construction activities is a way to maximize available resources that might otherwise be limited. Also, it reflects a system's willingness to invest in their own infrastructure by contributing in these areas. Applicants within counties designated by the South Carolina Department of Revenue, or DOR, as a Tier 3 or 4 county must fund all non-construction and other ineligible costs. Projects located in counties designated as Tier 3 and 4 by DOR, meaning they are distressed or least developed, have no construction match requirement. Those are the counties that are shaded in the light color on this map. Applicants within the remaining counties designated by DOR as Tiers 1 or 2 and shaded in blue are required to fund all non-construction and other ineligible costs, as well as provide a match of at least 25% of the total construction costs. I'll go over this in a little more detail next to clear up any questions you may have. So to help you all understand the match requirement, I have two examples to share. As I stated earlier, for projects located in Tier 1 and 2 counties, the application must reflect a 25% match of the project's total construction costs. This is consistent with what we have seen in previous state funding rounds. In the first example, the total construction costs are $775,000. The applicant has a 25% match requirement, which in this case is $193,750. The difference between the two is what you can ask for in grant funds and meet the match requirement. In the second example, The project has construction costs of $2.5 million. By multiplying the total construction cost by 25%, the amount that must be committed by the applicant to meet the 25% match requirement is $625,000. However, taking into consideration the newly revised amount for RIA grant requests of up to $1.5 million, the applicant has to commit to the match plus what the balance is after subtracting the potential grant award. In this case, the applicant commits to $1 million with a final local contribution of 40%. I hope these examples address some of the questions you may have when completing the application form. If there is uncertainty about what we're asking for, a follow-up call to your program manager once you have estimated project costs in hand may be helpful.
One final note on match requirements. We are flexible with regard to sources of the 25% match. It is entirely up to you as the applicant to determine where the remaining funds needed for the project come from. Obviously, an applicant may provide a cash match, but it can also come from other federal or state agencies such as SRF, Rural Development, EDA, or CDBG. It can be non-traditional local funds like impact fees or county transportation committee funds. It could even be support from the county in which the utility and its beneficiaries are located. And I'll repeat it again, the construction activities or items listed as ineligible a few slides back could be another way to meet the match requirement. And generally, the match must be focused on the proposed RIA project. If any of you have accessed more than one funding agency when carrying out an RIA project, you learn that we don't all pay for the same activities, and sometimes certain line items are tied to specific funding agencies. In such cases, please contact us directly about projects you are considering and be sure to have a detailed cost estimate so that we can review and discuss the eligibility. As you begin to pull together ideas for a project which will ultimately determine your submittal of an application, I'd like to review some general guidelines and thresholds that may impact your decision to apply. You may submit only one application in each of the grant categories. With the exception of phased projects, a single project is not eligible for more than one grant, regardless of the applicant. Once the project has been approved, it should generally be completed before another applicant is submitted. Most construction projects should be completed and closed within 24 months of grant award. And of course, an inability to complete a project within the grant period may be taken into account when reviewing future grant requests. Finally, applicants must be the owner of the system. In addition, the applicant must be able to demonstrate the ability to properly operate and maintain its system, as well as any RIA-funded improvements. Also want to mention that having a current federally funded SCIP grant or a state grant awarded as SCIP match does not preclude an entity from applying for a state grant if otherwise eligible. One of our agency strengths is the ability to offer some flexibility within our program requirements, guidelines, and thresholds based on current conditions and situations that may arise. So with that in mind, allow me to share with you circumstances under which an exception could be considered to the previously stated thresholds. To start, there may be times when the applicant does not own or operate the infrastructure being upgraded, but may still apply for a grant. Specifically, a local government can submit an economic infrastructure application even if they don't own or operate the infrastructure. This is also true when local governments are applying on behalf of a not-for-profit water or sewer companies that are within the local government's jurisdiction. Finally, it is appropriate for an eligible public entity that owns the infrastructure to authorize another eligible public entity that operates or maintains the owner's systems to apply on its behalf. In addition to the exceptions I reviewed with regards to ownership, There are also other variances to the thresholds that may allow for additional applications. For example, current grantees in Tier 3 or 4 counties at the time of application may be eligible to submit another application within the same competitive grant category if 75% of RIA funds have been drawn and documented. Again, this does not apply to state grants awarded as match or skip. To determine eligibility for applying for another state grant in this instance, the grantee should submit a written request from the chief executive official at least 30 days prior to the application due dates. We may require closeout of the existing grant as a condition of a new grant award. And keep in mind, the grantee must document the capacity to carry out multiple grants at the same time. There can also be multiple applications or grant awards if it is an emergency or significant jobs creation project. Even if a local government has applied on behalf of a not-for-profit water or sewer company, the local government can also submit one application, receive one grant award for itself. And as we continue to encourage regional solutions, we will consider these additional threshold situations as well. Each participant in a new regional partnership agreement may submit an application or receive a grant award for a separate project after joining the partnership. But thereafter, they will be considered part of the regional entity and subject to the regular threshold requirements. Finally, if the infrastructure is owned by one utility, who in turn authorizes another to operate, the operator can submit an application on behalf of the owner, and the operator can also submit an application for its own system. If you're unsure if the proposed project meets one of these thresholds, or there is another consideration, contact your grant manager for further clarification. Now, you've heard me say multiple times to contact your grant manager if you have questions. By me saying this, I hope you can appreciate that we are truly committed to helping you with this process. We really want you to be successful. Now, let me provide specific program details, beginning with the Basic Infrastructure Program.
The highest priority for the basic program will be given to projects that implement a new regional or cooperative approach that will lead to greater system sustainability. Projects that address water quality issues identified in U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, or South Carolina Department of Environmental Services, DES, consent orders or unsatisfactory ratings, or emergency projects that will resolve an imminent public health or environmental threat that has become critical in the past 6 months also rank high. Stormwater projects that would be considered under this priority are those that will resolve a recent public health and safety threat, creating greater resiliency. Next are projects that address other health and environmental issues, including facilities identified in DES sanitary surveys or compliance evaluation inspections as needing improvement, or that have resulted in frequent violations of DES water quality standards. Also included in Priority 3 are projects addressing documented stormwater problems where there are no existing drainage structures to collect and manage water flow. Finally, projects that improve existing infrastructure that has reached the end of its useful life or is in severely deteriorating condition, therefore negatively impacting the system, can also apply for grant funds. The priority also includes other projects that improve services and capacity for existing and future customers, and stream restoration to increase capacity and improve storm protection. Most of the applications we receive fall into the fourth priority, and historically, the most common purpose of funded projects is to address aging infrastructure.
In addition to the priorities related to need, other factors that are considered include project feasibility and impact. With regard to feasibility, the cost effectiveness of a project as compared to direct beneficiaries is one consideration. RIA will now consider $20,000 of state grant funds per customer benefiting to be cost effective. If more than that, provide additional documentation to make your case. Additionally, where there are line extensions to serve new customers, at least 70% should be committed to connect, and you should have written commitments at the time of application for it to be considered a viable project. Projects that are ready to go, meaning all funding is secured, an engineer has been retained, and permits are in hand, also demonstrates your ability to carry out the project in a timely manner. And finally, we look at the number of direct beneficiaries and the long-term impacts. Projects with system-wide impacts benefit more people. Now, within our basic infrastructure program, as I mentioned a moment ago, we will consider emergency needs that are time sensitive. Projects that require an urgent response to resolve a documented emergency may be submitted at any time for Tier 3 and 4 counties and will not be subject to comparative analysis in a funding round. Such projects will be evaluated using criteria for need, feasibility, and impact. And for projects in Tier 1 and 2 counties, applications should only be submitted during a competitive funding round. Consider the following when trying to determine if the project meets the definition of an emergency need. The situation is an imminent threat to health or the environment. Urgent or immediate action is required. And finally, no other resources are available to address the situation. For this type of project, the threat will have become critical in the past 6 months, and the applicant can sufficiently document that there are no other available funds to address the project. The narrative in the application should describe the circumstances that have created an imminent threat, when it occurred, and why immediate action is required. These types of projects should be completed within 18 months, which is different from the basic and economic grants, which allows for 24 months to complete a project. If a project request is submitted and does not meet the emergency need definition, you will be notified and we will hold it for consideration under the competitive basic infrastructure program, as opposed to asking you to reapply. Should the project submitted require an immediate response, generally those funding decisions will take about 30 days, sometimes sooner, and funding will come from the basic infrastructure allocation. Please note that applicants should only request emergency assistance on rare occasions. Generally, we expect systems to be prepared to handle emergencies, and your rates and revenues should be sufficient to handle repairs and maintenance. Now, in these next slides, I will review a few examples of projects funded in the past. They include sewer, water, drainage, and emergency projects. This first example is of a grant awarded to Metro Connects. The grantee took a proactive and targeted approach to address issues with inflow and infiltration, or I&I, and prevent sanitary sewer overflows in the Pelham Water Resource Recovery Facility basin in Greenville County, which includes 424 households. The RIA project involved rehabilitation of about 15,000 linear feet of deteriorated sewer main with cured in place piping. In coordination with regional sewer partner REWA and its wet weather program that seeks to collaboratively reduce I&I, Metro Connect set a target of a 0.4 million gallon per day reduction in peak hourly flow over a 5-year recurrence interval with this project. Data that has been collected since construction concluded suggested that the project resulted in an over 400% higher reduction than what was originally targeted. A grant was awarded to Aiken County on behalf of Breezy Hill Water and Sewer Company, a not-for-profit water and sewer company, to replace small water mains with larger mains to interconnect strategic parts of the distribution system. The improvements provided additional capacity and system redundancy for the Breezy Hill Water and Sewer Company's water system. The project benefited 188 residential and 4 business customers. This next example involves storm drainage improvements to address recurring flooding in the city of Beaufort's Mossy Oaks area, which is home to more than 1,500 residential properties and a school. Within the overall basin, there are 2 sub-basins, the northern basin and the southern basin, that both have a single point outfall that flows into the marsh at the battery. The city issued bonds for most of the project and was able to obtain grants from both CDBG and RIA to help close the financial gap. Those separate projects both will assist with the improvements in the overall basin. The RIA project is complete, and it appears from recent rain events that the new drainage system is operating as designed. This final example involves an emergency repair of a sewer line that crosses a small creek. The line collapsed during a rain event when 2 of the 6 piers supporting the line washed out. The line serves a 176-bed assisted living facility in Lawrence County. The work, which included installation of 4 new piers and approximately 100 feet of pipe, ensured continued sewer service to the facility and minimized an environmental impact to the creek. Now that I've gone over the priorities and other requirements of the basic infrastructure category and provided a few examples, I would like to talk about the second program category, which is economic infrastructure. Consideration will be given to projects based on a comparative analysis of the supporting documentation in the following relative order. The first priority in this program is for economic development projects that will lead to new job creation and private investment. This means there is an announced or soon to be announced company, either new or expanding, and they have committed to job creation. These projects are carefully coordinated with Commerce to determine feasibility, potential economic impact, and appropriateness of assistance. The second priority is to expand system capacity to help new or existing businesses create or retain jobs or to accommodate reasonable growth. Existing companies are already impacting their communities, but if there are limitations of the utility system, they may not be able to continue operating in the same way or grow in jobs or capital investment until infrastructure improvements are addressed. Finally, we will assist with infrastructure to serve publicly owned industrial parks and sites, essentially supporting product development for future economic opportunities. If you are a utility, be sure to coordinate with the County Economic Development Director to ensure you're targeting the appropriate improvements necessary for the park or site. Industrial sites with utilities already available saves time and money and makes the site more attractive to businesses who want to get operations underway quickly. We can also serve other publicly owned properties with demonstrated potential to create or retain jobs and private investment. Allow me to point out a couple of considerations when looking at potential projects in this category. Because they are state funds, only publicly owned infrastructure will be assisted. Also, keep in mind that for job creation or capital investment projects, RIA costs should not exceed $10,000 per job. Generally, RIA will only be involved when there is a funding gap after state and local incentives have been exhausted. The application should not be submitted to RIA until the final location decision has been made by the company and all incentives have been approved. For all job creation and capital investment projects, a performance agreement that commits to job creation within 5 years will be required from the company and the grantee. This performance agreement requires a pro rata repayment if the jobs are not created. Finally, most economic development projects will fall under the competitive grant category even when there is job creation. But if there is a need for a timely response due to the potential to lose the company and its jobs, the application could be considered outside of the competitive process, but that will be an RIA decision. As with the Basic Infrastructure Program, I would like to present a few examples of economic infrastructure projects that we have funded in the past. They include jobs, capacity, and product development projects. The first example is of a grant that was awarded to Dillon County for sewer upgrades to support a new company with plans to open a facility in an existing spec building. The work consisted of constructing a new sewer pump station as well as installing force main and gravity sewer lines. The company executed a performance agreement with RIA, agreeing to invest $30 million and create 30 new jobs within 5 years of the grant award. Next, we have the town of Cheraw. Their project installed gravity sewer within an industrial park, upgraded 2 pump stations, and replaced an old, outdated gravity sewer line, which was a major source of I&I to the system. The upgraded gravity sewer also increased the flow capacity to better convey wastewater from a neighboring town and the industrial park to the Shiraz wastewater treatment plant. In addition to the RIA grant, SRF loan funding was provided by the Clean Water SRF Supplemental Appropriation for Disaster Relief. This final example is of a grant that was awarded to Fairfield County to extend water service to the Peach Road industrial site where the county plans to construct a spec building to help with the recruitment of industry. The work included the installation of 6,000 linear feet of water pipe. Now, I hope these examples will help you to identify critical needs in your own community and potential projects that could qualify for RIA funding.
Hello, this is Kendra Wilkerson, and I'm a program manager at RIA. Now that Jackie has covered the details of our grants for capital improvement projects, I'm going to share some information about this year's planning grant program. This year's planning program is designed to provide planning assistance for eligible public utilities seeking greater long-term viability through regional partnerships. Planning activities must assess the feasibility and resource requirements of a regional solution for one or more water or wastewater utilities and address related technical, operational, financial, and managerial concerns. The maximum request will generally be $500,000, and awards will be based on the scope of work proposed. Planning grants should be closed within 18 months. As they don't have any design and permitting delays, we do expect procurement for a planning consultant to get started quickly after award. Public water and wastewater utilities are eligible to apply for regional planning grants. Stormwater utilities are generally not able to pursue the types of regional solutions this program supports, so it's only open to water and sewer providers. While nonprofit utilities may participate in grant-funded studies, they may not be a direct subrecipient of these planning funds. Applicants for planning grants don't have to commit any matching funds, which means that an RIA grant could fund the entire project. However, any additional funds committed would be considered as an indication of local buy-in during application review. Unlike our other programs, only non-construction costs are eligible for planning grant funds. The normal model is for the grantee to use a request for proposals or request for qualifications to hire a consultant to carry out the study or other plans, such that the entirety of the project costs are included in a single consultant contract. Be aware that any grant-funded contracts will have to be competitively procured through an RFP or RFQ process after grant award. And be cautious about involving consultants in the preparation of planning applications, especially if the same consultant hopes to win the planning contract. Please contact us with any questions about that. All funded activities must relate directly to the regional partnership under consideration, but may include general assessments such as system condition assessments, hydraulic modeling, and GIS mapping, or financial management assessments such as rate studies, budgeting, and operational cost analyses. A planning grant could also be used to facilitate discussions, identify issues, evaluate legal alternatives, and work toward a consensus solution. All studies should consider key technical or operational, financial, and managerial issues impacting the system's ongoing operations and the potential regional partnership, as well as identification of both short-term actions and long-term potential solutions. In addition, the utility viability tool must be completed for all participating utilities. The first priority for these planning grants is assessing regional partnerships for systems with long-term viability concerns. Second is assessment of partnerships for those that have significant compliance or financial issues. And finally, we will consider studies needed to advance other regional partnerships that are in progress or will lead to greater long-term sustainability. Now that we've gone over all 3 grant programs, I'd like to move into some instructions and tips on how to apply for any of RIA's state grants. The application package will contain an application form, a project narrative, and other required attachments. We do have a single application form for all of our state grants. Let me go over that form and point out some key information. This application can be used for all grant categories. It's a PDF you can download from our website. If the file opens up in your browser, the fillable fields may not work correctly, so be sure to download and open with Adobe Acrobat when you're ready to fill it out. The applicant information section is pretty straightforward. Just be sure to fill out this section if you are submitting an application on behalf of another entity, such as a nonprofit water or sewer company, or a separate utility that your organization operates. In this section, please give us some key information about your project, including a concise and descriptive summary. You'll provide a lot more details and context in the attached narrative. For project location, we ask that you include the city and county, as some utilities serve multiple jurisdictions. But you should also give more specific information about the location, such as an address, an intersection, street names, or a description of the section of town if it's something like lines in a residential area. You'll need to indicate which grant category you're applying in and tell us if the project involves water, sewer, or stormwater. In some cases, it may be more than one of those. In the project benefits section, please provide the number of customer accounts or taps that will be directly affected, not the service population or indirect beneficiaries. Remember that if you are claiming new customers, we require you to provide documentation that at least 70% of those new customers have committed to connect. If you're applying for an economic infrastructure grant for a project that will directly create or retain jobs or will involve documented new capital investment, you should fill out the economic impact section. Supporting documentation is required for any jobs or investment claimed here. The bottom of the first page is where you enter your actual funding request, as well as a summary of the other funds budgeted for the project. If you're applying for a basic or economic infrastructure grant, you should request RIA funds only for construction costs. Non-construction costs for capital improvement projects, such as engineering and permitting, should be included on the budget summary, but must be covered by non-RIA funds. If you have other sources of funding, such as a grant or loan from a different agency or a monetary contribution from a local government, you should specify those. Once you have all of your funding amounts entered, you need to ensure that the percentage of non-RIA funds meets the match requirement for your circumstances. For a basic or economic infrastructure application, the percentage of construction costs to be covered by non-RIA funds is the match percentage. The match requirements are summarized at the bottom of the page for quick reference. If you're applying for a planning grant, you should enter only non-construction costs. Next up is project schedule. Note that there are separate sections for construction projects and planning projects, and you should only fill out the one that applies to your proposed project. Please provide a reasonable estimate of when each milestone will be completed. These are some things you should keep in mind when building your project schedule. First, the project needs to be able to be completed within the grant period. If that isn't a reasonable expectation, then you should consider whether you have another, smaller project that you might submit. To determine a starting date, estimate that grant award will take place 8 to 10 weeks after the application date. When estimating the start of work date, remember to include 30 days for advertisement, followed by enough time for RIA to review all your procurement documentation after you get it together and send it to us. So the gap between advertisement and start of work should be at least 2 months. Of course, keep any expected materials delays in mind when estimating the length of a construction project. And finally, allow adequate time after the completion of the work so that you can request final payments and we can monitor and close out the grant. The state grant project management procedures have more detailed information about the typical progression of both construction and planning grants, which may assist you in preparing a realistic schedule. For construction projects, you will need to provide some additional information about permits and acquisition. You also need to tell us if the project will be split into multiple construction contracts. If so, you'll need to explain the reason for that in the narrative. You also need to indicate if you plan to use any alternative procurement method. The standard design, bid, build is the preferred method for RIA-funded projects. If you intend to do something different, like construction manager at risk, you'll need to justify that choice in the narrative and tell us more about how it will be carried out. Of course, we'll need you to provide contact information. Please be sure to fill in all the different types of contact, even if these are the same person. Note that we do ask for both the chief elected and the chief administrative official. For chief elected official, please provide the mayor, county supervisor, or board chair, even if your board isn't actually elected. The chief administrative official would typically be a town administrator or executive director. For small towns with no dedicated administrator, it would be appropriate to list the mayor a second time on that line. If you don't have an engineer or consultant working on the project, you can just leave that line blank. Planning projects will likely not have an engineer on board. Remember that even if you plan to use an engineering firm to do some or all of your planning activities, you will have to procure that firm through an RFQ or RFP process once the grant is awarded. Lastly, the application must be signed by the applicant's chief executive official, certifying that the information is complete and accurate. That could be either a chief elected official, such as the mayor, or an administrator or executive director. I'll provide more details on how and when to sign and submit the application in a few minutes. There are 5 required attachments for all applications. These are detailed in the instructions that are included at the end of the application form, and we encourage you to review them carefully. The requirements differ based on the type of project, so I'll cover attachments for construction projects first and then for planning projects. For all basic and economic infrastructure applications, that is, all construction projects, the first attachment is a narrative addressing the need, project description, feasibility, and benefits and impact. The narrative is the part of your application where you are really able to give us the full picture of your proposed project. The most effective application narratives are well organized into clear sections and cover all requested information, plus any additional information that's necessary to understand the project and the impact it will have. But they don't include extraneous or repetitive information. Detailed requirements are listed in the application instructions, but let me go over some key things you'll want to include. First, you should cover the need for the project. Describe the existing facilities that are proposed for improvements or upgrades, and explain in detail the problem that is being addressed. You should also include what steps have been taken or are planned to help resolve the issues. Of course, you need to provide a detailed description of the entire project, including any components paid for with non-RIA funds. You should describe how the project will be carried out and specify who will pay for which components of the project. If there are other entities that will help to carry out the project, be sure to explain their anticipated roles. There may be a need for a subrecipient agreement to formalize those arrangements if the project is funded. A very important factor we need to know about is the feasibility of the project. This includes both the ability of the project to solve the identified problem and your organization's ability to carry it out as described. Your narrative should identify how the project will cost-effectively solve the problem or improve conditions. Be sure to address the timeline by explaining how the project will be carried out within the grant period, including any anticipated problems or delays. Benefits and impact is the last required section of the narrative. Here, you should explain the expected outcomes of the project. There are several other required attachments for basic and economic infrastructure applications. After your narrative is a detailed cost estimate that's no more than a year old. It should have been prepared by an engineer and must reflect reasonable expectations in the current market, with no more than a 10% construction contingency. The estimate should include itemized activities, quantities, and costs. Lump sum estimates should not be submitted. Now, there are some projects where lump sum line items, such as mobilization or erosion control, are appropriate. When it's a treatment plant, for instance, it may be okay to list major lump sums like electrical systems or bypass pumping, but for most projects, itemized costs are expected. All project costs should be accounted for. That means you should include a breakdown of non-construction costs, such as engineering, as well, even though the grantee will be paying for those items. A PER may be submitted if it's relevant, but it's not required. The maps that you submit with a basic or economic application should identify the project location and system service area with census tracts outlined, as well as the existing infrastructure and the proposed improvements. It's okay to submit one map that shows all this information or a couple of maps that combine one or two of the requirements. It's crucial that the maps be legible, clearly labeled, and consistent with the narrative and cost estimate. Attachment 4 is relevant program documentation, which does vary depending on the project. For all water and sewer projects, you should complete the Utility Viability Tool, which is an Excel-based self-assessment you can find on the RIA website. The summary page generated after completion of the viability tool must be included with your application. If you have any difficulty accessing or using the tool, please don't hesitate to contact us for assistance. For stormwater projects, applicants should provide information about current or planned stormwater fees, operating budgets, and any recent plans for staffing and maintaining improvements. For basic infrastructure projects, we also need regulatory compliance documentation and other relevant documentation of the frequency, quantity, and severity of the problem, such as test results, repair logs, customer complaints, or photos. Other information that may be relevant to your application narrative could include a capital improvement plan or recent rate increases. For economic infrastructure, the requirements are based on the type of project. For those supporting job creation, you will have to provide a letter of job commitment from the company. For product development projects, we'll need documentation related to the industrial site. Attachment 5 should include all of the commitments or certifications you need to provide. That includes commitment or award letters for any non-RIA funds necessary to implement the project, as well as certification of public ownership of easements or property that are needed. Remember that all funded work must be on public property or within a utility easement or public right-of-way. For local funds provided directly by the grantee, we need a letter signed by the chief executive. The original signed letter must be provided with the hard copy of the application form. If your project involves work on any infrastructure that your organization does not own, for example, if you are applying on behalf of a nonprofit or a separate system that you operate, you must also include a letter from the owner of that infrastructure. If you plan to add new customers, they need to be 70% committed, and you must submit documentation of that. Planning applications require similar attachments. The first is the application narrative. Like with basic and economic applications, the narrative is your chance to give us a complete picture of your needs and your proposed project. Please be sure to carefully review the application instructions to ensure that you include the right information in your narrative. The first section of the narrative should address the technical, financial, and managerial challenges the applicant and any partners have faced. Concerns highlighted in utility viability tool results or recent audits should also be included. And summarize the steps that have been taken in the last 5 years to improve system operations and management, achieve regulatory compliance, or explore regional cooperation. Then, explain the regional partnership to be evaluated and describe the activities or assessments that will be included in the study. Also indicate how cost estimates were determined. The feasibility section should lay out plans to complete the project within the 18-month time period, as well as describe the roles that regional partners will play. Finally, address the expected impact of this project as well as any other information that might be relevant to our understanding of the proposed project and how it fits with the priorities of the program. Attachment 2 should be a cost estimate for each component of the study. Please contact us if assistance is needed with scope or cost development. Attachment 3 is a street map identifying the service areas of the participating systems as well as census tract numbers. Like with capital improvement applications, the applicant is required to complete RIA's utility viability tool, which you can find on our website. The summary page generated after completion of the viability tool must be included. If you have any difficulty accessing or using the tool, please don't hesitate to contact us for assistance. Correctly completing this tool will be an important element to our consideration of your request. If the applicant is submitting on behalf of another utility, the viability and financial information should be provided for the utility that is the subject of the proposed studies. If multiple utilities will be studied, the information should be provided for the primary applicant. Additional utilities participating will be required to complete the tool as part of the study if funded. Attachment 5 should include commitment letters for any non-RIA funds budgeted for the project and letters of support or need from additional participants in the study. The original signed letters must be submitted along with the hard copy of the application form. Various additional documentation may be appropriate, primarily to document need. Please include only directly relevant information, such as excerpts from long reports. Please visit our website to see upcoming application deadlines. Failure to submit a complete application package by the deadline could delay consideration of your project or result in a determination that the application is incomplete. We review applications electronically, so please email an electronic version of the application form and all attachments. The application form that you email should be unsigned and in the original PDF format, which means not printed and scanned. Submitting the fillable form in this way allows us to efficiently extract all the information you provide. The attachment should be in a single PDF in the requested order. It's crucial that those electronic attachments be complete, legible, and preferably not sideways. If you're having trouble combining files, please reach out to us before the application deadline and we can help you do it. We will work with you to make sure that we are putting all attachments in the correct order so that the application is presented the way you intend. Electronic files must be emailed. If you are having difficulty due to file size, let us know and we'll work it out. You're also required to mail or deliver a hard copy of the 2-page application form and any funding commitment letters with original signatures. That means written with a pen and not photocopied. All submissions for basic and economic infrastructure must be received no later than 5 p.m. on the deadline. Please note that planning applications may be submitted at any time during the fiscal year and will be considered in the order they are received. Remember that you can always contact RIA staff with any questions or for any assistance needed. I'll now turn it over to Abby to talk about what we do once we have your applications in hand.
Thanks, Kendra, and good morning, everyone. I'm Abby Linden, and I currently manage our grants in the PD and Waccamaw regions. We want you to have the information you need to submit a strong grant application. We try to be transparent about our selection process. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we are looking for and how award decisions are made. For those of you familiar with our website and previous workshops, this graphic is not new, but does offer a great visual for all of the points that we've made throughout today's presentation. When followed, the paths displayed on the screen will generally lead to a stronger application for consideration by our board. If nothing else, this graphic can serve as a reminder to establish tasks and goals to help ensure you not only meet the grant application requirements and the deadline, but also allow enough time leading up to that deadline to prepare, review, and submit. In all honesty, we can sometimes tell when applications have been pulled together at the last minute. It doesn't mean the project won't be funded, but as these rounds are very competitive, we want applicants to put forward their best effort. After the application deadline has passed, RIA staff will conduct a completeness review for each application received. The review is done to determine if the application addresses all questions and includes all attachments as outlined in the grant application instructions. All responses should be thorough and complete, and information included throughout the application must match up in all places referenced. For example, project work and quantities described in the application narrative should match what's included in the detailed cost estimate, and the cost estimate totals must match the application budget. As a reminder, the application and funding commitment letter must be signed by the chief executive official. Double checking all of this before submitting the application is key to putting forth your best effort. Everything included on the slide is needed for reviewers to have a clear understanding of the proposed project, as well as to effectively evaluate it. Unfortunately, if this information is not provided, the application may be considered incomplete and therefore ineligible for possible award until the next funding round. We do sometimes follow up with applicants to get clarification on the information submitted. However, that would only be to confirm our understanding of what was included in the application package, not to request information that was left out entirely. Qualified projects are prioritized based on the selection criteria of need, feasibility, and impact, as well as by doing a comparative analysis against all other applications that were received in that funding round. As previously mentioned, the information requested in the application instructions corresponds directly to the review criteria shown on this slide, so be sure not to skip anything or leave anything out. All eligible applications are presented to the board for consideration. Generally, the review and selection process takes about 8 to 10 weeks from the time that applications are submitted to when funding decisions are made. Please be aware that RIA's board may approve a different amount than requested or recommend special conditions of assistance. Once the board meets and selects projects, staff still has work to do before a funding announcement can be made. So please give us time to complete the entire process. All applicants will be notified in writing, and the selected projects will be posted on the RIA website, usually by the end of that same week. So we've talked about the different program requirements, how to apply, and the selection process. Now let's talk about project development and what you should be doing now, even before starting the application. As a state agency, we pride ourselves on working closely with local utilities, consulting engineers, and the Council of Governments, having regular communications about communities' water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure needs. But at the end of the day, all project ideas start at the local level. And those project ideas come from various sources. Maybe there was a study or assessment done that provided a detailed outline of what needs to be addressed and in what order. It may have been a capital improvement plan for budgetary purposes that details projects and funding plans for the next 5 to 10 years. In other cases, the projects are much more reactionary. Something breaks, increased capacity is needed, etc. Or DHEC conducts an inspection and identifies issues that need to be addressed. In some cases, they even provide a deadline for when the work needs to be done. And sometimes communities get inspiration from the stories they hear from neighbors about successful grant projects. While we do not require a call or meeting ahead of submitting an application, we have found that such discussions between key staff, consulting engineers, and the funding agency can help determine if your project is eligible and can help you prioritize competing local needs. We can advise you on appropriate supporting documentation and discuss timing of the project. One of the most valuable aspects of these consultations is that we can help identify other potential funding sources if they are needed and coordinate with other funding programs that might be involved in the project. If you are applying for a basic or economic grant that is a construction project, it is important to work with an engineer who can provide current cost estimates, detailed maps, and technical expertise as you begin to fill out your application and compile attachments. If you are completing RIA's viability tool for an application, you may end up having some questions. If you do, please call or email Kendra and have your latest audited financial statements handy. On complicated projects, or if we have never worked with an applicant, we have offered to review an application in advance. But we caution you not to call us for consultation or ask for a preliminary review at the last minute. In order to put your best foot forward with an application request, you should talk to us early in the process. And of course, we want you to be successful, but the reality is that we always get more requests for funds than what we have available. So there are always going to be projects that were solid efforts, but were not funded. As I mentioned, all applicants will be notified in writing of the board's decision. If your project was not selected for funding, RIA staff will contact you to review the application and provide technical assistance. You will be given the opportunity to improve the competitiveness of the project and resubmit the application for consideration in a future funding round. If your application is not funded in the fall round and you do not have any changes that you want to make, you can request consideration of the same application in the spring round. The request must be submitted in writing and signed by the applicant's chief executive official. If your application isn't funded in the spring round, you'll need to resubmit if you want to be considered in the next fiscal year.
Thank you for reviewing this information about RIA's state grant programs and application process. If you have any remaining questions, please visit the contact page of our website to identify the grant manager dedicated to your county. They will be happy to help. You can also send questions to the email address listed here. We look forward to working with you.